Hello and welcome to this new episode. In this episode, we're going to talk about Trito and the Wild Hunt and a lot of things in between. This episode can be seen as a complementary episode towards the History of Consciousness course. And diving a little deeper into the Proto-Indo-European Koryos and a lot of related things as well. So looking at this, we're gonna go first into Trito, then the Koryos, the Korybantes, Mars, the Wild Hunt as well. And I'm gonna say a little bit about each of them before diving in. Finally, you can also see there the Fianna. We're not gonna go into the Fianna within this episode, but I do want to point out that they are also Koryos related. We will be going into them the next episode of the History of Consciousness course, though, regarding the first fish of the age of Pisces. So within that episode, we're gonna talk about the Fianna and how this links to King Arthur. Then a little bit about what you can see here on this map. So first, you have both Trito and Koryos, and these are from 4,500 until around 2,500 before Christ, with Trito most likely predating the Koryos. So you have that. Then we're gonna go, next into the Korybantes, the worship of the goddess Cybele and the presence of the Korybantes in Phrygia, modern-day Turkey. Goes back to at least the 8th century before Christ. However, their religious practices and mythological significance may have even earlier origins, and also within specifically Greece as well. There's these elements as well known. Then next we have Mars, and worship of Mars as the god of war can be traced back to the early Roman kingdom around the 8th century before Christ. And he was an important deity throughout Roman history, and his cult grew significantly during the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. Though there are much more ancient links which are difficult to pinpoint, going back to the Proto-Indo-European Koryos. Where then, within this episode, the final thing we'll go into would be the Wild Hunt, which is a folklore motif present in various European cultures. And it is a spectral and often ghostly group of hunters, often led by a mythological figure riding in the sky or through the forest. And the Wild Hunt was believed to be a procession of the restless dead or supernatural beings, and its appearance was often considered an omen of doom or disaster. And exact time of origin is actually very challenging to pinpoint, as the stories of the Wild Hunt have evolved and been adapted over centuries. What I can say though about the Fianna that we're not gonna go into in this episode is that they were a legendary band of warriors in Irish mythology, and they were led by the figure named Fiann MacCumhill, and they were known for their bravery, skill in battle, and loyalty to their leaders. And the stories of the Fianna are part of the Fenian cycle of Irish mythology, which is believed to have been composed and transmitted orally from the early medieval period around the 7th century AD and later, before being written down in later centuries. We'll, like I said, go into the Fianna in the next course episode. So now going into Trito and cattle. And that's very much the very start of it, regarding Trito, where all of this started. And then, we will be tracing it further down the line and eventually back into the past. But before going into Trito, we would really have to go into the story of how the world was created in Proto-Indo-European myth. So, in the vast cosmos, the first man, Manu, embarks on a journey alongside his giant twin, Yemo, and a primordial cow. And in their quest to create the world, Manu performs a solemn sacrifice, offering his brother's life, while assisted by heavenly deities like the Sky Father, the Storm God, and the Divine Twins. And then from Yemo's remains, both the natural elements and human beings are forged. In that sense, Manu's act of sacrifice establishes him as the first priest, laying the foundation for the world order. And in the emergence of social classes, Yemo's departed existence assumes the role of the first king, with various classes originating from different parts of his body. And priesthood arises from his head, the warrior class from his breast and arms, and the commoners from his sexual organs and legs. Though, there are discrepancies between European and Indo-Iranian versions, it is believed that the primeval cow was likely sacrificed in the original myth, giving birth to other animals and vegetables. And Yemo's destiny may have led him to become the king of the other world, the realm of the deceased, being the first mortal to perish in the primordial sacrifice. And within this context, Trito holds significant importance in Proto-Indo-European mythology, and he is serving as the primal warrior and is also very much a revered culture hero in this reconstructed sense as well. And he shares connections with other prominent figures like Manu and Yemo, and assumes the central role in the myth of the warrior's function, setting the archetype for all future warriors. And according to the legend, celestial gods bestow Trito with cattle as a divine gift, which is later stolen by a fearsome three-headed serpent. And despite an initial setback, Trito gains strength from an intoxicating drink and receives assistance from the storm god. And together they venture into a cave or mountain where the hero triumphs over the monstrous serpent and returns the recovered cattle to a priest for proper sacrifice. And then through his heroic deeds, Trito becomes the original warrior, upholding the cycle of reciprocal offerings between gods and mortals. This intoxicating drink is also a very interesting thing as well, because there's, for instance, the mystery schools, there's references to such a drink, and also generally, one can think of the Holy Grail as well, in that sense as well. But going back to the mystery schools, for instance, there's those elements that have been incorporated from the Koryos tradition that are very much linked to, you have that with the Ofhebner as well, this kind of drink that creates this ecstatic state. But it can also be mythologically seen as the drink that the young man has that gives him this sense of vitality. So in that sense, it's the drink of vitality that he receives, often from a goddess in mythology. So there is some of that symbolism in that as well. And generally, in a lot of the in those later hero myths, it seems to be the case that's kind of the goal of the young man to have that drink. His enemy, the serpent, is generally associated with water and depicted as multi-headed or else multiple in some other way. And Indo-European myths often describe the creature as a blocker of waters, and his many heads get eventually smashed up by the thunder god in an epic battle, releasing torrents of water that had previously been pent up. And this original motive also finds reflection in Germanic mythology. For instance, the Norse god of thunder, Thor, vanquishes the giant serpent Jormungandr, dwelling in the waters around the realm of Midgard. And in the Volsunga saga, Sigurd slays the dragon Fafnir, while Beowulf in his tale confronts and defeats a different dragon. And the depiction of dragons hoarding treasures in Germanic legends can also be seen as symbolizing the community's wealth, but can also be seen as a remnant of the original myth of the serpent holding waters. These waters often being linked to vitality. Hence, the drink of vitality helping, figures such as Trito to overcome said serpent. Which could, from a Jungian lens, also be seen as being linked to maybe instinct, the integration of such. Because there's also a lot of horse motifs as well that later become part of it as well in the later traditions, specifically with the Koryos, for instance, and the Wild Hunt that you can also see. But very much, the story of Trito also served as a model for later cattle raiding epic myths, and, most likely as a moral justification for the practice of raiding among Indo-European peoples. What I do want to point out, though, which is interesting, is that within Roman mythology, scholars have linked Romulus and Remus to Manu and Yemo. And Romulus and Remus are both linked to the wolf as well, where Mars is the father of these twins, who is also linked to the Proto-Indo-European Koryos. But Romulus and Remus as twins also have been, to some degree, also linked to the divine twins, which are these youthful horsemen, either gods or, demigods, who serve as rescuers and healers in Proto-Indo-European mythology. And they're often represented as young men rescuing mortals from peril in battle or at sea. And divine twins rode the steeds that pulled the sun across the sky and were sometimes depicted as horses themselves as well. Where, the two brothers are generally depicted as healers and helpers, traveling in miraculous vehicles to save shipwrecked mortals or save them from particular, peril in battle, like I had said. And they're also often differentiated. One, is represented as a physically strong and aggressive warrior linked to cattle raiding, while the other is seen as a healer who rather gives attention to agrarian pursuits or romantic adventures. Where in the Greek myth, the Dioscuri are also seen as the inventors of war dances, which, were later learned by the Korybantes, who are linked to the Koryos. And the Dioscuri also being, these divine twins, so linked to the Proto-Indo-European divine twins. And with Romulus and Remus, it seems that there's some of that Manu and Yemo, but also divine twin symbolism kind of getting merged together. But then when it comes to the Dioscuri, these horse twins, one of them is mortal and the other is immortal. And there is a very interesting story regarding this as well, which actually is about cattle. So in this one myth, Castor climbs a tree to keep a watch as Pollux begins to free the cattle. And then far away, Idas and Lynceus approached. Lynceus is named after the lynx because he could see in the dark and spied Castor hiding in the tree. Where Idas and Lynceus then immediately, understood what was happening. and Idas, furious, ambushed Castor, fatally wounding him with a blow from his spear, but not before Castor called out to warn Pollux. And in the ensuing brawl, Pollux killed Lynceus. As Idas was about to kill Pollux, Zeus, who had been watching from Mount Olympus, hurled a thunderbolt, killing Idas and saving his son. Then, returning to the dying Castor, Pollux was given the choice by Zeus of spending all his time on Mount Olympus or giving half his immortality to his mortal brother. And, he opted for the latter, enabling the twins to alternate between Olympus and Hades. And the brothers became the two brightest stars in the constellation Gemini, the twins as well. And, them being between invulnerability and death and having a link to both Olympus and Hades, linked to also their father, the Thunder God, and their cattle raiding could link them to the Koryos as well. So there could be some of these elements combined again within that. What I also want to point out with that is also that Lynceus named for the lynx. I mean, if you look at that story also, what just comes to mind for me would be also kind of like hunter-gatherer going back, like if you take that back to hunter-gatherer times, the hunter fighting the big cat as well. So such symbolism could also be in there. Cats, these big cats also being, or, big-time enemies next to snakes. So, there could be some of those elements in that story as well. But before I want to go into the Koryos itself, I want to talk a little bit about how Trito, but also the Divine Twins fit into that. Because it really seems that when it comes to that, there is a definite link between the Divine Twins and the cattle raiding, and there's also with that to the Koryos. But then if you really look at that, at different figures throughout Indo-European mythology, think, well, not really maybe a Mars, but like a Romulus, but also Romulus being later conflated with Mars, specifically Mars Quirinus, and then also you having Apollo as well as such a figure connected to the wolf as a culture hero, really would connect Trito to the Koryos, in my opinion. And with that said, Apollo also slaying the serpent as well. So there's definitely something going on there. And then, with Apollo, on the other hand, we also have the Arctea connected to Artemis that might have been traced back to this reconstructed deity Hartho, where you can see with Apollo, that there's this twin in that case that has a similar role when it comes to the youth. One for men, the other one for women. So there's definitely something interesting that goes on there. But yeah, I want to go next into the Koryos deeper, because that's what we're talking about within this episode. So, as we know, the Koryos are adolescent males between 12 to 19 years of age, and a group of 12 members, no possessions, and final integration through marriage. And this, death and rebirth symbolism being linked to them as well. Often depicted as, shape-shifting into wolves, or also linked to horses. And like I had already said in the Age of Gemini video, the concept of bands of young warriors with a dual role, both living within and apart from society, is, widespread in various Indo-European contexts. And During certain periods, these groups would venture into the wilderness to hunt and raid other communities, while in the remaining time they were tasked with defending their own society. And also, that wolves and dogs were regarded as mystical symbols representing death, lawlessness, promiscuity, and the fury of warriors. And association with these animals, signified a state of liminality between invulnerability and death, as well as between youth and adulthood. And with that, the defining aspect of these young men's communities was the initiation ritual, which involved living outside the norms of society, often in stark contrast to its values. Additionally, these warrior bands were closely tied to specific animals, particularly dogs and wolves. And the connection between wolves, dogs, and youth war bands is well known in later comparative Indo-European mythology as well. And initiation rites of this nature, where boys lived in the wild, emulating the behaviors of wolves and dogs, are also documented in ancient texts from Greek, Latin, Germanic, Celtic, Iranian, and Vedic societies, all tracing back to a shared Proto-Indo-European origin. And in Latin, such groups were the Luperci, but also the Sali, while Greek had the Korybantes, Ephebes as well, and finally the Celtic, for instance, had the Fian, or the Fianna. And the reconstructed Proto-Indo-European word for these young warriors band is Koryos, roughly meaning war band or unit of warriors, derived from the Proto-Indo-European noun koro, meaning cutting, section, or division. And equivalents of this term are found in various ancient languages, such as Old Persian kara, Lithuanian karas, Celtic Koryos, Ancient Greek koiranos, Germanic harias, and Old Norse herian. And the lives of these warrior bands revolved around military duties, hunting wild animals, and pillaging settlements on one hand, and the recitation of cattle theft legends and heroic poetry about past heroes on the other hand. And leadership within the band was determined through a game of dice, and the outcome was considered the choice of the gods. And raiding cattle from neighboring tribes was also, a big characteristic feature of these Indo-European cattle breeding societies as well. And thus, the Koryos were also known for rescuing cattle, grain, fruit, and fish from either a witch or a serpent as well. And another thing also to note about that is that the members of the Koryos initially served as young unmarried males without possessions before their eventual incorporation into the Tefte, the tribe, people under arms, composed of the property-owning and married adult males. We can also see this distinction between Mars and Quirinus, the latter being linked to the men of the tribe, where the first is linked to landless young men. And the part regarding the witch or the serpent and the Koryos is also something that, we're gonna go into later again with Wild Hunt as well. In the ancient land of Phrygia, there existed a renowned brotherhood of warriors called the Korybantes, and these also have been linked to the Koryos by scholars. And these warriors were also known within ancient Greece. Hence earlier in the map also you could see me putting them there within Greece, because they're very much tied to Apollo and Zeus and Dionysus as well. And much like the Koryos, these warriors were closely attuned to the divine and wielded extraordinary powers, acting as protectors of sacred mysteries. And the Korybantes are born of the union between Apollo, the radiant god of light and music, and the muse Thalia. Though I do want to also point out something interesting, that sometimes the muses are actually referred to as water nymphs. associated with the springs of Helicon and with Pyrrhus. And that's an interesting element for what we're gonna talk about later regarding the Wild Hunt, because there's some nice element to that as well. So that's something to keep in mind for later. But now coming back to the Korybantes, so they are both linked to protecting Zeus as the divine child, but also Zagreus Dionysus, in the Orphic mysteries. And both of these children who they protect are linked to thunder. And, they protected both Zeus and Zagreus Dionysus from the Titans and other chaotic forces. Where then finally, in the story of Zeus, for instance, the thunder god Zeus overcame his father Kronos, who in his more ancient form was depicted as a serpent. And another interesting thing regarding Zeus is that one of the animals linked to Zeus is the bull, where Zeus is also known for punishing Odysseus and his crew when they killed the cattle of Helios. And Zeus, on top of this, had the epithet Lycios, same as Apollo, linked to a particular wolf cult, and was thus known in a more archaic form as Wolf Zeus, which is more ancient than the Hellenic Zeus that we know. And this is in connection with the archaic festival of the Lycaea on the slopes of Mount Lycaon, the Wolf Mountain, which is the tallest peak in rustic Arcadia. And here, actually, the young Ephebes, linked to the Koryos, were the participants who would undergo a werewolf transformation. But coming back to the Korybantes again and Zeus, according to Apollodorus, Rhea, after giving birth to Zeus in a cave in Dicte, gives him to the nymphs Adrastea and Ida, daughters of Melicius, to nurse, and they feed him on the milk of a she-goat, Amalthea, while the Korybantes guard the cave and beat their spears on their shields so that Kronos cannot hear the infants crying. Another interesting aspect regarding the Korybantes is also that they were linked with a sacred responsibility of restoring harmony and balance, facilitating the rebirth of Dionysus, for instance, the god associated with the cycles of nature's growth and decay. Were also, led by their king, they underwent the transformative rite of passage into manhood, engaging in rigorous training and discipline for several years. And through their devotion to the gods, they gained supernatural abilities and otherworldly strength. And during the winter months, when darkness held sway and chaos loomed large, the Korybantes gathered in sacred groves or caves to invoke the powers of the gods. They also worshipped the Phrygian goddess Cybele, the great mother of the earth, and Rhea, the nurturing mother of the gods. And with that said, I also wanna point that out, because that in of itself is also again something to take note of. The connection of the Korybantes linked to the Koryos, to these earth goddesses and the nurturing mother goddess Rhea, both being linked to this sense of vitality as well, which is going to be a recurring theme with Snake and these goddesses. But what is really important regarding this is also, that they very much safeguarded the divine essence, fostering its growth and flourishing. And that they, as pillars of strength and wisdom, were tasked with maintaining the cosmic balance. They can be seen thus too with, for instance, Zagreus Dionysus' sacrifice and the split of Dionysus as heavenly and Zagreus as chthonic, to be maintaining the cosmic order made by this sacrifice. Or they're also tasked of for this divine child to be reborn and the cosmic order thus to be renewed. which, could echo the sacrifice of Yemo by Manu, where, the first becomes the god of the underworld. Where, Trito, together with the thunder god, then overcomes the serpent and regains the cattle. So there's some of that element that could be present in that, because, the Orphics are known for incorporating these Koryos rituals in its Greek form later, also from the Korybantes into these Orphic myths as well. So some of those elements can be present within that. So, there can be these callbacks to that. Now, when it comes to Mars, Mars's link with the wolf is famously depicted in the story of his infant sons being nursed by a she-wolf after they were left exposed by order of King Amulius, who feared them due to his usurpation of the throne from their grandfather Numitor. And, also, within that myth, Woodpecker, also holy to Mars, provided nourishment to the twins. And in Roman art and literature, the wolf was often also shown as Mars's animal companion as well. And there's even a statue group depicting Mars in the company of wolves along the Appian Way as well. Or even finally during the Battle of Sentinum in 295 before Christ, the appearance of the Wolf of Mars, Martyrs lupus, was also seen as a sign of impending Roman victory. Something though what I wanna point out, which is interesting, which is not widely known, is that initially Mars likely served as a thunderer or storm deity, which also accounts for some of his diverse attributes concerning fertility as well. And this aspect was later assumed by other gods in the Roman pantheon, such as Sumanus or also Jupiter as well, where the spear represented Mars's instrument, much like how Jupiter wields the lightning bolt. And the animals most sacred to Mars are, like I pointed out already, is the woodpecker and the wolf. And these creatures, were often associated with the natural lore of the Romans, dwelling together in the foothills and woodlands. Thus, it is very interesting again that Mars, as the thunderer, is linked to, the twins, Romulus and Remus, where he's also linked to the wolf as much as they are, where, he's also seen as being the leader of this company of wolves as well. So there's a lot of that kind of symbolism with that already going on. But there's more, and let's dive into that next. So, Juno, Mars, and cattle. Yes, cattle, again. You're gonna have a lot of that in this episode. So, what is another important aspect of Mars in that sense is, yes, cattle. And that's, very much linked to the types of offerings he received. Some of his cult sacrifices included oxen. Mars actually was more commonly offered bulls, either singly in multiples or in combination with other animals. And Mars's mother is Juno, and her name means to rejuvenate. So there's some interesting symbolism going on with that as well. There are some scholars that also have pointed out that Juno, as the mother goddess, was connected with the idea of vital force, the fullness of vital energy, and eternal youthfulness. And she is allied with the warriors of Mars and also does link to the conquering of enemies. In a Proto-Indo-European lens, such a figure has been linked also as the mother of the divine twins. Though in the Roman tradition, the twins are instead born under Mars and his consort Venus, where Juno is the sovereignty goddess. Just like with Mars, cows were the animals mostly sacrificed to next to goats. Where Romulus and Remus are also known to fight against the cattle thieves to retrieve the cattle as well. The other brothers that are linked to Mars in their priestly role also would besiege Mars to protect against rust. Lewis, a term with a dual significance referring to both wheat fungus and the corrosive red oxides that could harm metal. And these threats pose dangers to iron farm tools and weaponry alike. In the hymn that survived, the Arval brothers depicted Mars as Pharos, embodying a savage or feral nature akin to that of a wild animal. And Mars's potential for savagery finds expression in his enigmatic associations with untamed woodlands, suggesting he might have originally been regarded as a god of the wild beyond the confines established by human civilization and as a force that required appeasement. And Cato, in his work on farming, also invoked Mars Silvanus for a ritual to be performed in Silva, the woods, uncultivated area that, if not kept in check, could encroach upon the fields necessary for crops. And Mars's identity as an agricultural deity might stem solely from his role as a defender and protector, or could be inseparable from his warrior nature. For instance, the leaping of his armed priest, the Sali, was, believed to hasten crop growth. And the Sali, also known as the Salians, or Salian priests, were, known as these leaping priests of Mars in the ancient Roman religion. Within Roman lore, they are supposedly have been introduced by King Numa Pompilius, and they were 12 patrician youths dressed as archaic warriors with an embroidered tunic, a breastplate, a short red cloak called a paludamentum, a sword, and a spiked headdress called an apex. And they were charged with the 12 bronze shields called Ancilia, which was linked to a thunder god, which, like those of the Mycenaeans, resembled the figure 8. And one of these shields was said to have fallen from heaven in the reign of King Numa, and 11 copies were made to protect the identity of the sacred shield on the advice of the nymph Egeria, who was the consort of Numa, who prophesied that wherever that shield was preserved, the people would be the dominant people of the earth. Also, each year in March, the Sali made a procession around the city, dancing and singing the Carmen Saliare. And Ovid, who relates the story of Numa and the heavenly Ancilia in his Fasti, had also remarked that he found the hymn and the Salian rituals outdated and hard to understand due to their archaic nature. And an interesting thing to note also is that, these 12 patrician youths dressed as archaic warriors, it's again number 12 in linked to youths, and thus also linked in that sense to the Koryos, and they have been linked to the Koryos as well. And I also want to point out some important feast days dedicated to Mars as well, which is also very much interesting to look at. So you have February 27th that had the Icreria featuring chariot or horse races. Then you had March 1st, Mars's birthday, also sacred to his mother Juno. Next would be on March 14th, another Equeria again with chariot races. Then at the same time on March 14th or 15th, there was the Mamuralia, a New Year festival, when a figure called Mamurius Veturius, possibly representing the old Mars of the past year, was driven out. Next would be March 17th, an Agonalia or Agonimian Martiale, an obscure observance that that was held at various times for different deities, took place on this date. Where on March 23rd, you had the Tubilustrium purification ritual for the deploying army. Such purification rituals were also known for the Proto-Indo-European Koryos as well. Where finally in October 15th, you had the ritual of the October Horse, involving a chariot race again, and actually Rome's only known horse sacrifice, which can in this sense also be seen as a remainder of the Proto-Indo-European horse sacrifice linked to the inauguration of a member into the warrior caste. And these rituals would actually, in the Proto-Indo-European sense, linked to the Koryos, take place around this time, fall into winter. Where, on October 19th still then, there was the Armilustrium, where there was again a purification of arms. And with this said, this link, with Mars, with the thunder god, through him wielding the spear, his link to wolves, and being the leader of the wolves, or a pack of 12 warriors, also very much, again links him to the Proto-Indo-European Koryos. So there's a lot of this interesting symbolism going on in that as well. And with the spear, one can also think in that sense also, the spear shooting lightning. Odin's spear, Gungnir, for instance, as well, has this ability. So there's something interesting going on there for sure, which might be linked to something way older that is Proto-Indo-European. Where you first, when the music was playing, you saw the Norse mandala. I do want to point out that there is an older version of this that can be reconstructed going more back to the prehistoric times, where actually Odin would be the figure leading the Koryos pack, with the opposite figure actually being Freya, where with Freyr he becomes associated with a stag instead of a boar, where the boar is actually associated instead with his wife Gerder, which we're gonna go into as well still regarding the Wild Hunt, where Thor linked to thunder and also the word Park actually is connected to Perkunos, the Proto-Indo-European thunder god, where Tyr actually originally used to have the function as king of the gods, function that Odin eventually took on due to his rise in prominence within the Norse pantheon. So that's something interesting to keep in mind as well regarding this, because this very much shifted from this to what you saw earlier. So as I also had pointed out, in Proto-Indo-European mythology, the wolf was linked with the warrior class who would transform into wolves or dogs upon initiation. And this association is also evident in Iron Age Europe and the Germanic sphere, where warriors like the Berserkers and Ulfhednar were particularly feared. For instance, Harald Fairhair was known to have an army of Ulfhednar, often referred to as wolf-coated men. And these warriors wore wolf hides and were believed to channel the spirits of wolves to enhance their battle prowess. And they exhibited resistance to pain and fought ferociously, much like wild animals. And both the Ulfhednar and Berserkers were also closely linked with the Norse god Odin. And Old Norse mythology, also includes 3 malevolent wolves, Fenris, Ulfr, or Fenrir, along with his children Skull and Hati. And according to legend, Fenrir's offspring will consume the sun and moon during Ragnarok. However, wolves Geri and Freki, as Odin's faithful pets, also symbolize the positive qualities such as bravery, loyalty, protection, and wisdom. And wolf's close association with Odin is also a recurring theme in Old Norse tradition concerning shapeshifters and animal warriors allied with the god Odin. And scholars, believe that this connection may be related to the specially initiated band of warriors akin to the Koryos. But next to the Koryos, another interesting link can be made to the Proto-Indo-European Trito as well. So, according to the Prose Edda, after Ymir was formed from the elemental drops, so too was Audumbla, a primeval cow, whose milk Ymir fed from. And Prose Edda also states that 3 gods killed Ymir, the brothers Odin, Vili, and Ve, where one of Odin's name is 3D, which could possibly link him to Trito, because 3D actually means third. But this is mere speculation regarding the link to Trito here. Because Odin over time has taken up many roles and attributes, so it becomes difficult to know what is truly part of his being, like regarding Tyr as well, like I pointed out. But now to the Wild Hunt itself. So the Wild Hunt, as I said, is a prominent folklore motif featuring a procession of supernatural beings heard mainly during late autumn and winter, particularly around Christmas and New Year. And this belief is widespread across Europe with, various leaders of the hunt, often gods, goddesses, mythological figures, or ancient legendary kings, accompanied by the souls of the deceased. In the Germanic variation, the hunt is frequently led by Odin, Woden, or Wotan, and it includes eerie, ghostly dogs as well. Sometimes fallen warriors or entire armies are also part of this spectral entourage, with the leader of the hunt appearing as a warrior riding on horseback, often accompanied by wolves. In Sweden, this phenomena is referred to as Odin's hunt, where Odin may transform into an ancient king or chief. The belief held that Odin would ride on horseback alongside his dogs, surrounded by an assembly of otherworldly creatures and the souls of the departed. And in, numerous Scandinavian accounts, which is interesting, is that the horseman would be seen pursuing the Huldra or Hulder, also known as Skogsrat, ruler of the forest, or Skogsfrun, lady of the forest in Sweden, through either the forest or across the sky. And Huldra was a female forest or water nymph, often seen as a beautiful woman with a cow's tail who steals the souls of people. And those who are enticed into following her into the forest are, according to myth, never seen again. And this could be a remainder of the serpent or witch stealing the cattle. And I want to go deeper into this figure next, because there's some really interesting aspects regarding that which may shed more light on what's going on regarding that, because it very much seems that it's not just a serpent necessarily, but it can also be this either this nymph or witch that is connected to the stealing of the cattle, or the withholding of the waters. And I want to go deeper into that, and what this could be linked to, because it's quite the rabbit hole to go down. Which also, in that sense, also can in some sense link back to, for instance, connected to vitality as well. So the captivating forest creature known as a Hulda or Huldra as a name derives its meaning from both covert or secret. And in Norwegian folklore, she is considered the archetypal representation of the Hulder race, not just an individual. And in Swedish folklore, she is referred to as the Skogsvra or forest spirit, and in Sami folklore, she is known as Ulda. And despite her beauty, the Huldra is characterized by an unusual inhuman trait, often depicted with an animal's tail, typically from a cow or a fox, and a back that resembles a hollowed out tree. Within the Nordic tales, they can be seen similar to nymphs in Greek mythology. And, legends also suggest that any human man who engages in intimacy with the Skogsra becomes introverted, as it is believed that a part of his soul remains with her. And hunters seduced by the Huldra may receive good luck in their hunts, but unfaithfulness to her can lead to numerous accidents. And to dispel her wrath and the stormy nights she might cause, a hunter could fire a shot against her, which, was believed to, dispel her wrath and get rid of the stormy nights. The Huldra is also linked to the goddess Hulda, which can be seen as the goddess that these Huldra, these nymphs, are connected to. And in later variations of the Hulda myth, a split can be seen in the figures, where Hulda, the goddess, accompanied Wotan in the wild hunt and was linked to cattle retrieval, representing the light form, being seen as the guardian of the animals, where on the other hand, the Hulda figure was associated with the darker side, with holding waters and stealing cattle. And these aspects might have originated from the same ancient figure, akin to how Hecate in Greek mythology could both withhold and grant vitality. In Scandinavian mythology, also Huld, that has been linked to Hulda, is a figure mentioned only by vulvas and sidekonas, women skilled in the practice of cider, and she appears in various sources such as the Ynglinga saga, Sturlunga saga, and a late medieval Icelandic tale. And in the latter story, Huld is portrayed as Odin's mistress and the mother of demi-goddesses Thorgerdr and Irpa. The name Thorgerdr is believed to have, connections to the Jotun Gerdr, as Thorgerdr is sometimes described as a troll or giantess. It is also suggested that Gerdr might be a shortened form of the name Thorgerdr. In Tinder Hallkellsson's 10th century Drapa on Hakon, quoted in chapter 43 of Olaf's saga Tryggvasonar, found in the Heimskringla, Thorgerdr being referred to as Gerdr, where there isn't as much really known about the figure named Irpa. But then when it comes to girder in Norse mythology, so girder means fenced in. And she's a Jotun and goddess, known as the wife of the god Freyr. And many scholars theorize that girder represents a goddess associated with the earth. And both the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda describe her as the daughter of Gaimir and the Jotun Arboda. And scholar John Lindow suggests that Gerda's name is etymologically linked to the concepts of the earth and enclosures. And the wedding of Gerda and Freyr is often interpreted as a divine union between the sky and the earth, symbolizing fertility and the union of a fertility god with a representative of the soil. Hilda Ellis Davidson also draws parallels between Gerda's role in Skirnismal and the Greek goddess Persephone, where, like Persephone, Gerda's choice is to either remain in the dark underworld, which would make our world sterile, and there would be an outbreak of famine. But finally, really Gerda's bridal fate lied in the upper world when she agrees to meet Freyr. There's similarly, being this link between, this going into the underworld and ascending out of it again. Winter and spring. That kind of symbolism can be seen regarding that, and the coming back of fertility. Now to Hulda herself, she is believed to have ancient roots as a mother goddess, possibly associated with the earth, although, concrete evidence is lacking and, this does remain speculative. And in a manner reminiscent of the relationship between Demeter and Persephone, it is suggested that Hulda might have shared a connection with Gerda. However, due to absence of definitive proof, this idea, falls again into the realm of speculation. But, Hulda being linked also with the Wild Hunt and having that connection with Odin, there could be something like that going on, at least with some kind of mother goddess, even if she would not be associated with the earth. Because, we do know from, for instance, the Korybantes, for instance, that they were also connected to a mother goddess, both Rhea and Cybele. Much like, Mars's mother is Juno, the mother goddess. Where with the Korybantes, their mother was in the ancient sense a water nymph, and their father Apollo, was then linked to the wolf. So, in that sense, it could be a repeating pattern, because also, think again, water nymph and the holder being a water nymph as well, water/forest nymph. So there could be some symbolism with that going on. So it could be, Hulda, the mother goddess, with her nymphs, the Huldra or the holder. Both playing a part in the withholding of the cattle and vitality waters, but also in retrieving the waters and cattle at the same time as well. As such, reconstruction of this could be the Koryos, who have as their mother the earth goddess or a nymph, go together with their leader, Trito, or the thunder god, off to fight the negative witch serpent that withholds the waters, vitality, or cattle. Where the mistress of the beast also plays a role within the hunt as a guiding figure or second leader figure, much like Hulda is also doing. So next to this mother goddess link, there can also be this connection to this kind of Mistress of the Beast role as well, regarding that she could have been taken up as well. Because in that sense, we know that Artemis, she's been linked to water as well as, the mermaid Artemis, where, she has the title Lady of the Lake. And it's also connected to the water nymphs. So there could be such symbolism going on there as well. But this all very much remains speculation, and it's very difficult because, there's some sources that say that Hulda, has these mother goddess links, which is highly plausible. But at the same time, there's also these links there, like to the Mistress of the Beasts. So she could have played this dual role where, within Greece, we do have, then Artemis as the mistress of the forest and wild animals as this separate figure from the Earth Mother. Though technically it can be that, Artemis, that is also linked to the she-bear, that has been known to be linked to the Earth Mother and Gaia, could be, just seen, like we had said in the Age of Gemini video, for instance, as an emanation of the Earth Mother. So there can be a lot of blurring happening there. Another thing also that is clear regarding all of this, though, what I want to point out is the idea of the heroes Gamos as well. Where with the Koryos and Octea, this played a big role. Same for the Gobekli Tepe rituals, as much as with the Romans, where through Quirinus they would become a man of the tribe and thus eligible for marriage. And this also can be seen with Gerder and Freyr as well. In later times, coming back to Hulda, her association with the spirit world through the magical arts of spinning and weaving also has led to her depiction in Catholic German folklore as a figure connected with witchcraft. And she was taught to ride alongside witches on distaffs, which bear a resemblance to the brooms often associated with witches. And a distaff is a tool used in spinning to hold unspun fibers, keeping them untangled and aiding the spinning process. But in old church documents, Hulda was also frequently equated with Diana as early as the 11th century. She was regarded as the leader of women and female nocturnal spirits, known as Holden or Hulda in common language as well. And these women were believed to leave their physical bodies and spirit, venturing out through closed doors into the night while their husbands slept. And they would journey great distances through the sky to attend feasts or partake in battles among the clouds, very reminiscent of the idea of soul flight. The historian Carlo Ginzburg has identified, similar beliefs persisting throughout Europe for over a millennium, and these shared notions involved both men and women leaving their bodies and spirit to follow a goddess who bore different names, such as Hulda, Diana, Herodias, Signora Oriente, Richella, Arada, and Perchta. And he notes, striking morphological similarities between these goddesses and earlier figures like Hecate, Artemis, Artheo, the matress of Engynion, the Matronea, Epona, and even figures from fairy tales like Cinderella. So again, there could be a link there regarding, Diana and Artemis with Hulda, definitely. But, we can also see regarding that, again, Diana and Artemis and, Artheo and the Matronea can, in that sense, also link back to a mother goddess as well. Just manifestations, again, of the feminine. So, it becomes very difficult to really put it together exactly what Hulda was. And it very well could be that she very well was for the Neolithic people this mistress of the animals instead of an earth goddess. So there can be that that symbolism there. But it's just generally difficult to to figure this out, because there's not much known about this figure of Hulda in the ancient sense. Something other noteworthy is also something that happened way later during the 16th century, where there was a fable recorded by Erasmus Alberus, who tells of an army of women carrying sickles, supposedly sent by Frau Hulda. And Hulda's presence is also found in some pre-Christian Alpine traditions as well, that have even persisted to modern times. And you can see a picture of this as well. And in these traditions, she is revered as a goddess, overseeing spinning and weaving, much like the myths of Hulda in continental German regions. And some believe that she represents the feminine counterpart of Berchtold, also known as Valtan, possibly linked to Odin, and that she may have been associated with leading the wild hunt either alone or alongside an Odin-like figure. And the scholar Maria Gimbutas identified Hulda as an ancient Germanic supreme goddess predating most of the well-known Germanic pantheon, including Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki. And according to her, these ideas harken back to pre-Indo-European Neolithic Europe, suggesting that Hulda's worship has deep ancestral origins, which is very much plausible. And the term Perchten is the plural form of Perchta, and it refers to both her entourage and the animal masks worn during parades and festivals in the mountainous regions of Austria. Perchta being another form of Hulda. In the 16th century, the Perchten appeared in two forms. The first was the Schön Perchten, or beautiful Perchten, appearing during the 12 nights and festivals to bestow luck and wealth upon the people, where the second form was the Schiach Perchten, or ugly Perchten, characterized by fangs, tusks, and horsetails, which were believed to drive out demons and ghosts. And the Perchten were also closely associated with midwinter and were seen as embodiments of fate and the souls of the deceased, often also linked to ancestors, which is also very reminiscent of the wild hunt and the old Koryos rituals regarding the ancestors as well. During the winter, it is also customary to, bring the cattle down from the upland pastures as well. And it has been suggested that this may have been derived from end of summer festivals for the Germanic goddess Idun, also known as Iduna. And the name Idun has been variously explained as meaning ever young, rejuvenator, or the rejuvenating one. And the golden apple she is connected to, and her apple orchids also being possibly connected to solar symbolism, but also to sovereignty, as without her the gods lose all of their power. And according to Lithuanian scholar Daiva Vaitkevichini, Wilhelms Manhart's treatise on Latvian solar myths, for instance, also identified other metaphors for the sun, such as a golden apple, a rose bush, and red berries. So this solar symbolism, looking at that also could be very much present regarding that as well. Both linked to the solar symbolism, but also as much to fertility. But this also very much brings to mind the following reconstructed myth of the divine twins as well. where during the night the divine twins were said to return to the east in a golden boat, where they traversed the sea to bring back the rising sun each morning. And in what seems to be a later edition, confined to Europe, they were said to take a rest at the end of the day on the Isles of the Blessed land in the Western Sea, which possessed magical apple orchards. And it is at the Isle of the Blessed where the dawn goddess Huis is said to rest during the night. And it isn't clear, if this might connect Idun with Huis as the caretaker of the apple orchard, or if it might even be that the golden apples are symbolic of her function of a dawn goddess. But this remains all speculation. But what is known, though, is that Bragi is her husband, who is the skaldic god of poetry in Norse mythology, also noting once again that the divine twins, as much as Trito, are also connected to cattle riding as well. Which is, a good reminder for the final part. The main, reason also bringing Idun into this as well is, due to this link between, the divine twins and the wild hunt. So it's very interesting in that sense that both the Perchten ritual and this ritual connected to Idun, so Iduna, are linked. So this could establish a deeper connection with both the wild hunt, but also with the Koryos tradition in some sense as well. Though I also, want to point out that with both Hulda and with the Perchten ritual, this also could be going back way earlier to the pre-Indo-European Neolithic traditions as well. So let's get to the pre-Indo-European Neolithic traditions. Going a little bit further back than Trito even. So regarding this, we're gonna look specifically at the Danubian people. The Danubian people were stock raisers, with cattle, so cows, being favored, though goats and swine also were recorded as, being present. And like farmers today, they may have used the better grain for themselves and the lower grades for the animals. And it is known that the Danubians supplemented their diets by hunting deer and wild boar in the open forests of Europe as it was then. Hence, a figure such as the mistress of the animals or the beasts could be very plausible. The Danubians being located around the Danube River, obviously, due to the name. But as is true of all prehistoric cultures, the details of actual belief systems maintained by these linear pottery culture populations, such as the Danubian people, are, poorly understood. Though what can be said is that the mother goddess model is, the major one applied to the Neolithic, and also does to the Danubian people. Again, a figure such as Hulda, just also fits into this tradition going back to pre-Indo-European Neolithic times. Where later, the Proto-Indo-European people might have thus included this guardian of the beasts by absorbing her into Hulda, into their pantheon, where she, in some of the traditions, leads the Perchten and others leads the wild hunt together with Odin. Often her dark half being seen as the being stealing / holding the cattle to be freed by the wild hunt, divine twins, and possibly Trito. Linking this also to the Koryos tradition as well. And with all of that said, very much the basis of this, what we can establish is that Hulda as a figure very much can be seen as being linked to either an earth goddess or goddess of the wild animals or guardian of the wild animals in the forest, where she then later is starting to represent his dual form, where she possibly could have had this singular form, where she has where this dual form isn't split into two figures, because you do have the holder that are seen as the holders of vitality. They take away the cattle, where Hulda is seen as the one working together as the guardian of the beasts, together with the wild hunt, to retake the cattle and to overcome the hoarder of the waters, where she takes back this vitality and helps them in that sense with it. We're also, for instance, was also linked to this sense of vitality. Similarly, also Danu, for instance, being linked to this as well. So there could be some symbolism going on there as well. Like we said, she's also been linked to figures such as Artemis as well, and Diana later on as well. So there's definitely some interesting stuff going on there. But it's very difficult to exactly pinpoint, because there's generally a lack of evidence, because there's very little known regarding these pre-Indo-European Neolithic traditions, and thus we can trace them, these figures, kind of back towards the very early times when the Indo-European peoples came into Europe. But then it's generally difficult to trace it back. But definitely from what we can say is that within the wild hunt, she's generally seen as a guardian of the beasts that works together with the wild hunt. So linked to, this overcoming of, either you can say it in that sense, the serpent, or in this case, it's the witch, the dark nymph. In that sense, it's sometimes also seen as this forest demon that holds the vital waters or the cattle and steals it. That then, and also was also seen, as this being that can steal a person's soul and thus their vitality. Summing up, that's very much that can be said about her. Where Odin as the leader of the Koryos, with the wild hunt that can be seen as the Koryos pack, were fulfilling this role of the Koryos, being led by Trito, going after to reclaim the cattle, reclaim this sense of vitality.
Thank you.